Hi friends! So this week we're going to continue talking about poetry, and on Tuesday you were introduced to a new poem called My Next Door Neighbor is a Witch. And when you had this poem you were asked to do two things. You were focusing on two elements that we find in poetry. The first one was rhyming words. We know a lot of poems have rhyming words in them, so you were looking at this poem and you were identifying all of the rhyming words in it. So I highlighted, you might have circled, but I highlighted all of the rhyming words that I saw, like witch, ditch, strange, change, hat, cat, nose, toes. Then you were asked to practice imagery. Now remember, imagery is what you imagine when you're reading a poem. What picture are you painting in your head when you listen to the words of the poems? And a lot of poets, when they write their poems, they want to connect to your five senses. So what can you imagine something looking like? What can you imagine something smelling or tasting like? Or even what sounds can you imagine hearing in it? And then like what something feels like. So then you were asked to draw a picture after reading this poem of what you thought. And this was a really good poem to practice imagery on because it talks about a scary witch and all the crazy foods that she eats. But today we're going to talk about identifying parts of a poem. So we're going to be talking about lines, line breaks, and stanzas. So the first one I want to talk about are lines. Those are the easiest things to identify when you're finding the parts of a poem. So a line is just a single row of words in a poem. So when you see single means one. When you see one line in a poem, that's one line of words in a poem, that's a line. So I like to put it at the beginning, and I'm going to put a number 1. A line break, when you hear the word line break, a line break is just where the line ends. So this is a line, and then here's the line break. We don't need to label our line break. So let's keep going. So here's our first line, and now I'm going to my second line. Put a 2. Here's my third line, 3. My fourth line, 4. My fifth line, 5. Remember, a line is just a single row of words. 6. My next line, 7. Go all the way down. Here's my line break, so my new line is starting. 8. Now, I'm just going to repeat this pattern for the rest of the poem. So I'm at 8. I'm going to keep going. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. So there is a total of 22 lines in this poem. And a reason why we label our lines is because sometimes when we are trying to identify something in a poem, or if you're answering a question in a poem, it might tell you, in line 7, the author is asking, or the poet is asking, so instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, oh, I've already labeled my line. So I can just go and say, here's line 7. I can look for my answer in here. Or especially if it's further into your poem, like if they say in line 16, what was the soup made out of? So I can find number 16. Oh, there it is. And I can find that when she made horrible soup, it was made with doggy poop. So that way I don't have to reread it or sit there and count it. I can just identify my line right away. Also, if you're using unwrap strategies in here, if you prove something, you can say you always found it in line 13 or line 4. And that way it's just easy to identify. So this poem has 22 lines. Now we're going to identify the stanzas. So a stanza is a group of lines in a poem that are separated by a space. So stanzas kind of remind me of paragraphs. How paragraphs are groups of sentences that can be separated from a space. So right here is a giant group of sentences, and there's a huge space right here. So I'm going to put right here, stanza 1. So this whole group right here of sentences is stanza 1. Now here's a giant space that separates it to my next group of lines in a poem. So here are more lines in my poem, and that's the next big space. So I know that this whole group of lines is stanza 2. And then I see my giant space right here. And here are 4 more lines of words. So I know that this is going to be stanza 3. So this poem, My Next Door Neighbor is a Witch, has a total of 22 lines. And remember, a line is a row of words. And it has 3 stanzas, which are groups of lines. We have 1 separated by a space, 2 separated by a space, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 3 stanzas. So for today's activity, you're going to be identifying how many lines are in a poem and how many stanzas are in a poem.